Hey, it's Anthony Meisner with Land Title. Came to bring you your big update for the month. So let's dive right into Boulder County data and just see what's going on. I think the most important thing that you got to remember right now is we're in a rising inventory environment. We have 31.5% more active listings than this time last year. The under contracts continue to rise. We had a good amount of under contracts last month. We're still 7% year over year increase, which is pretty cool to see. You can see year to date, we're just 2% above where we were last year, but the active units, 32%. So lots of more inventory to choose from. The average sales price seems to still be steadily rising about 5.5%, 6%. So good news on the macro front. Now, when you look a little bit more into the data, detached versus attached, here's your look at the detached market. Boulder City is actually pushing almost 400 units of listings right now, active listings on the market. Longmont at 250. Keep in mind, those two markets are very similar in size. So to see that kind of change in the city of Boulder, you can see that it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all market here. Lafayette has had the least amount of increase outside of a small area like Niwot, but a lot of the markets are up 50% in Erie, 40% in Superior, Louisville, Longmont area. There's a lot more inventory coming to market right now, especially in this detached market. The attached market, kind of the flip side of the coin in some ways. Louisville has had an absurd amount of attached inventory come to market for them. Even though it is a smaller market, you can really see that their 27 units is a lot of attached units. Some of the other markets, though, a lot of these are kind of steady as the course. 30% more in the city of Boulder, up to 250. It wasn't long ago when we talked about 250 being the entire Boulder County listing, market out there. So when you see the attached market specifically having that much inventory, it is definitely changing the dynamic between the buyers and the sellers, right? Because buyers have so much more control and sellers are much less in the driver's seat than they have been for years. You can see here in the month supply of inventory, 4 months of inventory. We are definitely in a balanced market, pushing towards a buyer-favored market here across all marketplaces. City of Boulder's at 5.6 months. So it is absolutely feeling like a buyer's market out there in the city of Boulder. But then you got places like Erie and Longmont, Niwot, and even into Louisville and Lafayette, where in the county, it feels pretty balanced, right? And even some of those markets might be a little buyer favored in certain neighborhoods. Or seller favored, I'm sorry. And, with balanced markets across most of the county where it's a little bit more affordable, this is a dynamic difference across counties, right? So as you kind of look across everything, the days in MLS, though, this is really not too far apart between all these markets. Place like Louisville that might be one of the faster markets at 35 days in MLS, but then you've got all the other markets led by the city of Boulder with the most inventory at 53 days in MLS. So it is taking a little bit longer to sell homes than it did a year ago. You can see that year over year change is pretty similar, but there's definitely a lot of inventory that's selling quick and a lot of inventory that's lagging behind. So the quality of the inventory out there that's getting sold, I think, is probably one of the bigger takeaways. If you look by price range, let's look at detached single family specifically. Luxury has done really well this year. You see at the 2.5 to 3 months of inventory, we've really compensated and made up year to date. We're up 30% there. We had a big month. The 3+ million market, we're up 54% year to date at the luxury inventory. Now the part that struggled and suffering the most is like our median, right? Our median meat and potatoes on the market. So if you look from 500 all the way up to about 2 million, 2.5 million, that market is just continuing because it's sluggish with interest rates being very similar, right? So the detached market is definitely moving along with that increase in the luxury market. If you look at the attached market, this is where, year to date, we've definitely seen some harder times for the lower end of the inventory. Anything under about 600,000, we've seen a slowdown in sales. If you look above that, though, there's definitely some shining light through here where you see some of the higher end stuff finally starting to sell, which is a good sign. So 800 to 1.5 million, we've seen some more sales taking place in there. So that's a good sign. But it is really a little bit of a tough market. The craziest part is you've definitely seen a large amount of sales taking place that's abnormal for these ultra luxury type attached product in Boulder, which is really neat to see, but it's not something we've really had in our marketplace before. So very cool to watch that. If you look at month supply of inventory and days on market by price range, keep in mind what we care about the most here is what does this mean for our clients, right? So if you're using this in a listing or you're using this with a buyer under $1 million, it's still very seller favored in some ways, right? Once you get over $1 million to, let's just call it 1 to 1.5 million, you got a pretty balanced market there at 4 months of inventory. And then you hit that 1.5 and up, we really start to get into buyer favored markets. Lots of inventory. This market is very saturated with active units, so they have their pick, right? And by doing so, buyers are getting a better deal up in those luxury price points. And there's just a lot of demand up at the really high end still, but there's so many listings, right? When you have so many listings and not as many buyers, you're seeing that month supply of inventory grow, just like you see at 2.5 to 3 million. We're talking 16 months, right? That's a lot of inventory. It's not taking that long to sell everything though, because the new stuff that comes on the market that's really good and price right is the stuff selling. And if you look at it in the attached market across the board, lots of inventory, right? Buyers have the upper hand in almost every single price range, and in some price ranges far more than others. So that is kind of the biggest takeaway. The other thing about the days on market here is you really have a longer sales time in the attached market than you do the detached market. So 50 days in MLS, that means active to under contract. So take that as it is, right? It's just a longer sales cycle and one of the faster times of the year. If you look at it by average sales price, how does this relate? Over the last 12 months, we've seen a rise of about 1% in sales price in the detached single family home market. I would argue that everything is very stable, right? You can see in Louisville, it's up about 10%. Very different product type being sold in Louisville than there was this time over the last few years, right? We have a lot of rebuilds off the Marshall fires that are getting sold. You're seeing that in Superior as well. And that's pushing price points up because we're building more expensive homes than we had. It's not that the market is appreciating faster in Louisville. We have a lot more inventory. It's actually pushing prices into a more stable environment. But with those higher priced homes getting sold, we're seeing that change in the marketplace. The attached market, on the other hand, it has a lot of downward pressure. And you can see in most markets, we're seeing a softening in the attached product. So, somewhere between 2 and 8.5% in Superior. So that is a much tougher marketplace. If you look at over the last 12 months, year over year or month over month, you can see some swings in there. But the moral of the story is that this one has too much inventory. And when we have too much inventory, we see a compression in prices. If you look at this is exciting to see. You can see where we are sold unit wise. We really have been pushing this year, and we're, our sold units are just slightly behind where they were last year with a little bit slower start in that cold winter we had. But it does seem like we will outpace last year. The real question, I think, by the end of the year is really how much are we going to do that? And how much love are we going to get from interest rates? Because they've been so stable up until this point, which almost seems like it's going to be a stable interest rate environment for longer. But we just don't know, right? So with uncertainty in interest rates, I think par for the course, right? Very similar to last year is probably what we should expect until something changes. And if you look at the sold to list price, this gives you a very similar story. We're down a little bit, 0.44%. Actually, year over year, we're only down 0.1%. So across most of these markets and price ranges, though, you can see it's a little bit better deal for the buyer because there's so much more inventory, but not super significant. So use that as you can. If you have any other questions, concerns, you want some local market data, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm Anthony at Land Title, and catch you next time.